Today we're going to look at an example of a river valley in the UK to identify its major landforms of erosion and deposition, and the river valley that we have looked at is the River Tees. So we're going to look at the long profile of the river, which starts its source up in the Pennine Hills as a relatively steep upper course and becomes much more of a shallow gradient as it gets towards the end of its course, and it ends as an estuary in the North Sea. So it starts at its source in the Pennines in the hills. So let's start with one of the landforms that you will find in the upper course. So in the upper course, erosion is the process that dominates over deposition, and you will find a very large waterfall called high force. And a waterfall can be drawn as a series of diagrams to show how it changes over time. And a waterfall has or will form when there is a layer of hard rock, and in the case of high force it is whinstone. Let's put a W there for whinstone. And the soft rock below is actually sandstone. And as the water falls over the waterfall, we have the processes of erosion taking place, hydraulic action, which is the force of the water forcing air into the cracks of the rock, particularly acting on the soft rock, and it blasts apart the rock and therefore eroding it. We could represent this by a little boxing glove, because you can imagine the force of the water punching into the soft rock. So that's one of the major erosion processes responsible for undercutting into the soft rock and creating the plunge pool. Secondly, we have abrasion. An abrasion is where material that has already been broken up, so it could be collapsed parts of hard rock as the waterfalls retreated over time, being thrown by the force of the water into the bed of the river and into the sides. This acts like a sandpaper, so we could draw a little piece of sandpaper there, and that wears away like a giant piece of sandpaper the base of the river and the river banks. Over time, the waterfall's soft rock will become much more eroded than the hard rock, and it will leave quite a large overhang. Eventually, gravity, there's nothing to support that hard rock, very resistant rock to erosion, and gravity will pull that down, and you end up with more material in the base of your plunge pool, which will add even more material for abrasion. Once that has collapsed, it forces the waterfall to retreat upstream, and what you end up having is also a gorge. So it's a waterfall and a steep-sided gorge, which is found in the upper course of the Tees. As we travel further down the river's journey, as we get to the middle and the lower course, instead of erosion being more vertical, it becomes lateral, and that means it happens side to side, and we get meanders in the lower course. And there is a very large meander in the settlement of Yarm, found on the River Tees. Now, meanders occur because we have this lateral erosion, and erosion will happen on the outside of your river bend, and this is due to the thalweg. The fastest course of the river water is on the outside of your bend, and the slowest is on the inside. So where on the inside you'll get lots of deposition, where you'll find a river beach on the inside, and on the outside there is erosion, where you'll get a river cliff and undercutting. There's much less resistance on the outside, so it's much faster speed of water. So you can imagine yourself in a car driving around a roundabout. You're often thrown to one side, and it's that sideways movement where erosion is happening on the outside. Over time, if they had not put management methods in, which they have at this particular meander, we would see the meander becoming much more elongated, and the two sides where erosion is happening would get closer together. Eventually, the river will break through, and what will be left behind as the river takes the shortest course is an oxbow lake, and that will be repeated time and time again. And this is an example of deposition and erosion taking place to create a landform. Another feature we find in the middle and the lower course are the floodplains. And these are areas of land either side of the river which can be flooded when a river is experiencing response to heavy rainfall. And the width of the floodplain is actually controlled by the size of the meanders. So as the meanders change over time, it controls how wide the floodplain is. And the floodplain is the area in which a flood occurs in the middle and the lower course. And it's controlled by the meanders due to their lateral or side-to-side erosion. Finally, in the middle and lower course in this section, we have levees. So either side of your riverbank, we have natural embankments. Now you may have seen flood walls which are built on rivers, but these are man-made embankments. So levees are natural embankments, and these are created when, during a flood, a river deposits its material onto the floodplain, but the heaviest material will be deposited first. So it ends up being deposited on these embankments, and the lighter material is carried further onto the floodplain, which actually is very fertile for farming, so very good for farmers. So heaviest material is deposited, and over time these levees will build up along the side of the river channel, so you get slightly larger levees, and naturally increasing the capacity of a river to hold more water. At the very end of our river's journey, we find the estuary, and the River Tees has an estuary at Teesmouth. So this is where the river meets the sea, and it's relatively calm and sheltered. There's a lot of deposition. So what you find at the mouth of the river, there's a huge amount of deposition, and you've got sand and mud flats. The water here is tidal, which means the river level will rise and fall each day. The water will flood over the banks of the river, carrying the silt and sand onto the valley floor, and as the tide reaches its highest point, the water is moving very slowly, so the sediment is then deposited, and you get lots of sand and sediment built up at the end of your river journey. Over time, more and more sediment is brought down that's been eroded during the river's journey, and builds up to larger and larger area of deposited material. At low tide, you will be able to see this deposited material as sand and mud banks, and actually provide very important intertidal habitats. So that is your example of a river valley in the UK and its major landforms of erosion and deposition. We have waterfalls in the upper course, where it starts in the Pennines, with vertical erosion, waterfalls and gorges. As we go down into the lower, middle and lower course, we have meanders, which can potentially lead to oxbow lakes, if allowed to naturally, floodplains, and we have levees. leading to the very end of the river's journey at the sea, where we have an estuary.